Like is more or less desensitized to this. This is what this is like rape marketing, actually. When Israelis or rapists in general film themselves doing these things, they can make the argument that, oh, it was actually consensual and this person enjoyed it. It's going to be much harder to argue that you were a victim of rape and sexual torture, and this person was doing X, Y, and Z to you, when the cultural messaging that is pushed everywhere is that those things that that person was doing to you was actually pleasurable. It's harder to make that argument. And actually, as a sexual assault forensic examiner, when I would do these exams and try to get specifics on what crimes occurred, it was hard to even get the victim or survivor to describe and classify what happened to them as crimes. How can we tackle these crimes and this violence when it's become so enmeshed within sexuality? It's pretty difficult. And a big reason for this is pornography, because these are the sexual scripts that are being fed to us. That was kind of a tangent, but the recent video that I did about the site Motherless, it was actually revealed just the other day. It was being hosted on Dutch servers. The Netherlands is one of these places that is heralded as a bastion of women's liberation and sexual freedom and all this, because they've legalized prostitution. But actually, it has much higher rates of actual human trafficking. And when you are legalizing this, you are making the problem even worse. Of course, this Motherless site was hosted on Dutch servers, but it's also a former Israeli IOF soldier who owned this, like the Israeli former IOF terrorist named Simon Shlomi Elimehe. He had been hosting Motherless for over a decade and was hosting child pornography for a long time as well. I just read yesterday, though, that the site was taken down. This sexual perversion and militarized rape culture is very often portrayed by the IOF terrorists, who regularly film their crimes and are proud of them and upload them for the entire world to see. It appears to me as if they are engaging in these satanic sexual, to me, as if they are engaging in these satanic sexual rituals. Not only they are engaging in these satanic sexual rituals, not only are they getting pleasure from this sexual perversion and domination and sadism, they're also getting pleasure from this voyeurism. Not only are they engaging in these acts, but they're able to show it off to an audience who don't support it, and they don't want to see it either, yet there's nothing that they can do about it. Another piece of evidence that demonstrates to us that pornography is central to the Zionist project is the owner of OnlyFans, who is dead now, by the way. He allegedly died from cancer. Leonid Ravinsky, he was a Jewish Zionist billionaire. and he was one of the leading donors to APAC. He donated at least $11 million to APAC. And it was because of him and OnlyFans that we have this modern pornography industry and normalization and acceptance of selling our bodies in a way that is unprecedented. So what I hope to show today was the relationship between Zionism and pornography and sexual deviancy. And actually, if you care about Palestine and if you care about defeating Zionism, it's impossible to continue to engage in consuming pornography, in deriving pleasure from pornography, or defending pornography, because look at who are the characters that are orchestrating this. Not only are we anesthetizing ourselves to caring about others, to caring about things like rape and sexual torture and pedophilia and incest, it's normalizing all of this violence. This sexual deviancy that is so rife within the porn industry is more or less what Zionism is based in. If you are a so-called progressive or leftist who still wants to continue to believe the myth that pornography is somehow helping women, liberating women, helping sexuality, just keep in mind that not only are you defending pornography just like incels, Alan Dershowitz has also been a major proponent and defender of pornography. So that is who is in your camp. So not only is quitting pornography helping you on an individual level just have mental and cognitive sovereignty and being able to relate and connect to human beings in a way that is actually impossible when you're consuming pornography, but you are helping reduce the drive and the demand for things like child pornography and sex trafficking. If you are struggling with pornography addiction and want resources in how to stop, there is an amazing organization that I've gotten a lot of research from. It's called Fight the New Drug. And the documentaries that Exodus Cry have made regarding this are incredible, and I would recommend watching those as well. The next video that I'm going to make on pornography will be how pornography is actually made, because I think for consumers of pornography, they prefer to not know actually what's behind the curtain or how it's made, but we can't ignore these things. These are human beings on the screen. And even though we're completely objectifying people that we see on the screen, they have a story, and there's a whole history of how they even got into that position. Even for people who consent to engaging in pornography, they are the most vulnerable among us. This is not a profession that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos's and the Trump children are going to choose to do. This is a profession that one chooses to do when they don't have any other options or good options, or maybe they have been misled by this pro-pornography, big porn, fucked up marketing campaign to convince especially young women that this is something that can benefit them. I'm going to continue to hopefully demonstrate to at least my audience, and I have an amazing audience. So thank you so much for still being here if you made it to the end of this video. But I hope to continue to demonstrate to my audience just how evil this is, and why we need to be louder in our advocacy against pornography and the wider human and sex and child trafficking industry as a whole.
In an alternate timeline where superheroes exist, have you ever wondered just who could stand up to one of the most evil men of our time, taking him from the courtroom to the prison cell, and finally getting the justice that we deserve? Now, before we get into the video, obviously I don't want to make this a complete joke. Jeffrey Epstein is a monster, and this is purely for entertainment purposes, so don't take this too seriously. What is it about Epstein that makes him an Avengers level threat? First of all, he has a vast network of connections, access to politicians through bribery, blackmail, and espionage. billions of dollars in the bank, a secret island home base surrounded by water, likely above average to high IQ, and he is a potential demon slash has made a deal with the devil. His weaknesses, completely normal human, even leaning out of shape. His age is getting up there, so he is far removed from his prime. Zero experience in direct combat with superhumans. The last place he wants to be is in a direct 1v1 confrontation with a hero of any caliber. He's extremely arrogant, which could lead to his downfall, especially against some of these other high IQ heroes. And public exposure is a big thing for him. If you manage to leak his shady dealings, it can turn the tide of public perception, which Epstein relies on. The criteria: this must be done non-lethally. We want Epstein making it out of that prison cell. He must be brought to justice to stand trial for his crimes. Characters must operate within their normal moral codes, which you'll see later is extremely important for this video. Prep time is permitted for both parties. And public opinion and legal system is very important. If Epstein is able to turn the tide against a hero, I would consider that a win for him. Let's begin with Superman. We have a direct comparison here in Lex Luthor, who also has that vast political network and billions of dollars. However, Jeffrey lacks those physical countermeasures like kryptonite and high-tech suits, which is the only thing keeping Luthor in the fight in a direct one-on-one engagement. Meaning, for Epstein, challenging Superman physically is absolutely out of the equation. This ends in nothing but a jail cell. Jeffrey's only viable strategy is political and media manipulation, utilizing those contacts to create public distrust of Superman's strategy is political. Physically is absolutely out of the equation. This ends in nothing but a jail cell. Jeffrey's only viable strategy is political and media manipulation, utilizing those contacts to create public distrust of Superman. This is something we saw in the recent Superman movie where Luthor used Superman meddling in global conflict to, pretty much ruin his reputation. However, I still have this 80-20 Superman. He is extremely adept at gathering evidence, has super hearing and X-ray vision, which means secrecy with him is nearly impossible. And let's be real, is Jeffrey Epstein really gonna be the guy to turn public perception against America's golden boy, Clark Kent? Not a chance. I could even be swayed to 90 or 100 to 0. I really don't see Epstein winning this one. Next, we have Daredevil. Again, I could even be swayed to 90 or 100 to 0. I really don't see Epstein winning this one. Next, we have Daredevil. Again, direct comparison in Kingpin. Now, let's go over Daredevil. I really don't see Epstein winning this one. Next, we have Daredevil. Again, direct comparison in Kingpin. Now let's go over Daredevil's strengths: incredible investigative skills, very impressive legal knowledge. If this goes to the courtroom, he is dismantling Epstein piece by piece. He is impossible to intimidate physically. As we mentioned, Epstein, completely normal human, far removed from his prime. But Daredevil is vulnerable to institutional corruption, has extremely limited resources. His law firm, not taken off yet, not doing the best. So that's a problem. Definitely easier to frame and discredit. And again, he operates at a street level instead of a global scale, meaning, Epstein's IQ, prep time ability, access to, his vast resources, and even the ability to retreat to his secret island surrounded by water is a massive plus for Jeffrey. Unfortunately for Daredevil, I have this at 7. 7030 resources and even the ability to retreat to his secret island surrounded by water is a massive plus for Jeffrey. Unfortunately for Daredevil, I have this at 7030 Epstein. We've seen in recent adaptations that Daredevil can and has lost institutional battles against Kingpin's political influence, and I could see something very similar happening here. He just doesn't have the resources or the power. Batman, this is a top 0.00001% individual in every stat. If this was a role-playing game, he is level 100 in everything. Connections are even more expansive than Epstein, and he probably out-earns him as well. Has access to the Justice League supercomputer, meaning if Epstein attempts to retreat to his private island surrounded by water, Batman can find him with the press of a button. This guy is the world's greatest detective. IQ is far higher than Epstein, who is most likely sitting at slightly above average. He mogs Epstein to oblivion in literally every conceivable way. This is an absolute prep time merchant stomp, although let's be real, I don't even know if Batman needs prep time for this one. Just a singular search on the Justice League supercomputer and Jeffrey's entire operation is coming crumbling down. Verdict 100-0 for Bruce Wayne. Homelander, the Superman clone. Now, this one's really interesting because, I mean, we all know raw power. It goes to Homelander. But as we've seen in The Boys TV show, he is easily manipulated. There's direct comparisons here with Stan Edgar and Stillwell. I could definitely see this as a situation where Homelander is turned into a puppet due to his need for love and validation. This emotional instability inherently creates weaknesses for Homelander. So my verdict is 45-55 Epstein. However, I do see a long-term win condition for Homelander. Definitely has underrated intelligence when not ego-driven. It's really all about when Homelander flips that switch from being puppet to the puppet master. Oh boy, we have the CW Flash. This guy is an absolute clown. He has a room temperature IQ, probably in the single digits. Cannot beat up a villain of the week without an Iris pep talk. Calls himself the fastest man alive, but gets speed-mogged by literally everyone, including non-speedsters. If Epstein finds himself in a one-on-one confrontation, all he has to do is walk to the next room and the Flash cannot catch him. Epstein would do this guy like the Thinker, except he would actually win. This is 99-1 for Epstein. The only chance Barry has is a pep talk from Iris. But, as we mentioned, Epstein is slightly above average in terms of intelligence, so he's gonna do his homework, take her out of the equation, and Barry is going to become even more incompetent than he already is. It's a stomp for Epstein. I could see this at 100-0. Yeah, that's the video. Thank you so much for making it to the end. I had a lot of fun making this one. Again, it's all jokes. I'll see you in the next one.
is a very good weapon to use. And finally, we have Fav. And Fav is kind of weird because the reality is that there are so few teams where Nicole's burst actually matters, and pretty much all of those teams don't really need that much energy on Nicole herself. So the question is, how much value do you get from the Fav reducing the rest of your team's ER requirements? In some teams it's good, but it's never really better than TTDS. If you care about the burst, you probably want to swap from Nicole to your carry to get all 4 projections onto the carry. And if you swap from Nicole to your carry, TTDS is going to be way better than Fav, pretty much no matter what. So unfortunately, Fav is a no in almost every team. And if we order them from best to worst, Sig and Starcallers, then TTDS, then Atlas, then Oathsworn, then Fun Fav. Next up is artifact sets, and this will come as no surprise. You want her on the new set. The only possible way that you would want to use something else is if another character on the team wants to be using Celestial Gift, or if you're not getting Hexerai Resonance. If that's the case, you can just put her on whatever other support set. I guess I say whatever other support set, but it's basically just Noblesse or Scroll. Some people might think about trying to use her on a 2-piece attack to increase the attack buff, but she's so saturated on attack that getting an extra 2-piece increases the attack buff by about 50, and looking at a character with a 800 to 1000 base, that's like 5% attack. That's worse than half uptime Noblesse. Just use Scroll. 12 damage percent is better. And if you can't use Scroll because she's not triggering a reaction, then fine, put her on 2-piece, just suffer, I guess. Put the Celestial Gift in the bag, move on. Artifact stats. Because she doesn't really use Fav, we don't really have to think too much about crit rate. All we really care about is attack and ER. And in a lot of teams, we don't even care about ER. So she's pretty much always either attack, or ER, attack, with attack being pretty much always what you want to do. Finally, we talk about the teams. Obviously, I've used Varka as an example because Nicole is pretty much the character that is designed for the Varka team. But how good is she for the Varka team? Well, the reality is, she's alright. She is an upgrade, but she's not the upgrade. There are 3 things that are buffing Varka's teams next patch. Nicole, the new set, and Prune. And let's just say that Prune puts the other 2 to shame when it comes to how much she's doing for the Varka team compared to the alternatives. And the main reason for that is because in Varka's current teams, you're using Bennett, who's a good unit, and Venti, who's a less good unit. And so Nicole competing with Bennett, she's good, but you're replacing a character that was already good. Whereas Prune competing with Venti is a bit different. The thing is, most likely Prune is going to end up on the Nicole banner. Actually, by the time this video comes out, we'll know for sure. Which means if you want to get Prune, you're going to have to go for Nicole. As a whole, with all 3 of these contributing factors, Varka's teams get significantly better next patch. But 1, even if you decide to go for Nicole, you're not guaranteed to get Prune. You're not guaranteed to get Prune Constellations, and the team is like 10% worse at C2 Prune versus C6 Prune, at C5 Prune versus C6 Prune. Basically, if you pulled for Varka on his first banner, it sucks to be you, and it sucks to be me because I pulled for Varka. Because you end up with a character that was released on a banner that was different from his actual 4-star support, and so unless you're planning on going for Constellations on your 5 stars, you're just very unlikely to end up with C6 of the 4-star for his team. And I mean, yeah, it makes evaluating him so weird because I don't think we have any other character like that where they have like a full premium team with 2 extra limited 5 stars and a 4-star designed for them, where the 4-star was not released with them. Like every time we've had that, the 4-star was released with them. So you've been able to at least get them and maybe get some constellations on them too. But for Varka, it's cooked. Because of that, Varka is going to be a character that, even more than characters like Varessa, are going to have their performance vary a lot based on the account, based on factors that just might be outside of your control. And the biggest issue, I would say, with these Varka teams is that Nicole isn't that big of an upgrade. Because Nicole isn't that big of an upgrade, you need to get Nicole and Prune in order for the banner to really be a meaningful upgrade to Varka, which means unless you're planning on going until you get Prune C6, really, like, you shouldn't be wasting your primos on the Nicole banner. You should be getting Varka's Sig at that point. But with all of this, like, preface For the Varka team, she's good. There's a lot of factors going for it, and she is overall an upgrade over Bennett. She's also a shielder, which is going to make Varka feel better to play if you're against aggressive enemies. And the team as a whole is actually going to be strong enough, assuming you have Rune C6, to make this relevant meta-wise. It's not quite at Columbina Lunar Team's level of power, but it's somewhere between the best versions of Aino C6 Lunar Teams and Columbina Lunar Teams. Compared to characters like Mawika, like full premium Varka with C6 Prune, will end up performing at a similar level to a Mawika that's not too combo optimized, with just like getting all of your melts, but no real combo optimization past that. And because that's the way most people play Mawika, then for a lot of people, the Varka performance would be pretty similar to Mawika. But again, right, like I said, that's with C6 Prune. And it's also with Durin, right? I haven't actually talked about Durin at all, but this is with the full premium team with Nicole and Durin. Technically, either Nicole or Durin are kind of replaceable. You do really want one of the two because you want someone to be able to use the bounty set, and because you need to buff the absorbed elemental damage that Varka's doing, you can't have an Animo character on that set. And with the set being as good as it is, having either of the two for Varka is much more impactful than having Durin was before the set. Getting either Durin or Nicole is going to be a lot better with the set than it is now, but getting the second one, it's really more to try to get prune cons. But anyways, enough about Varka. The next one I want to talk about is Kinich. Kinich is actually not a Hexarai character, which means that the burst, completely worthless, and the attack buff doesn't kick in instantly. The amount of time between Kinich taking the field and the earliest you can release Kinich's first E is less than 3 seconds. And because Kinich, from what I understand, snapshots stats upon release of your E and not when it hits, then it would mean that if you do your default Kinich combos, you don't have the 300 flat attack on the first E. And especially if you have constellations on Kinich that buff that first E specifically, that might be a pretty big deal. But from what I've tested, it does seem to be possible to still get 5 E's on Kinich without doing the first E as early as possible, without it being too rough. If I can do it first try when I test it, that's like how I can tell that it's probably easy enough for most people. So as long as you delay your first E a little bit, so either by using the burst early or just by doing one more set of pew-pews before the first E, you can get the 300 attack buff on all of the E's. So for Kinich, right, you have this 400 to 600 attack. The 300 attack is like maybe, but you might lose it only on the first E. You still have it for most of the damage. You don't have the burst. The 40 damage percent is green because right now, Kinich's teams kinda suck. Kinich's current teams want to run Durin because they want a pyro unit that has off-field, but you don't have a second good Hexarai character. Technically, you can use Fischl, you can use Albedo, but those are worse without the Hexarai condition than your other options. What that means is that Nicole not only enables the Hexarai passive in a way that allows you to get the 40% damage from the new set, but she also increases the shred you get from Durin by 15%, right? You get the full 35 instead of only 20. You can get the TDDS, but this one's a little bit more sus because Kinich rotations are generally less than 20 seconds. So even if you do get TDDS, it won't be every rotation, it'll be every other rotation. And then at that point, it's kind of just similar in value to Scoured Atlas. So if you have Atlas, it might not be worth it to run TDDS, whatever, who cares? The off-field buff can actually matter quite a bit, because Kinich's teams have Durin and often also have Emily. Now, Kinich's best team isn't using Emily. You're kind of better off just hyper-focusing on buffs, because Kinich by default is a character that has a lot of motion value, but pretty poor access to external buffs. His kit gives him basically no attack. He has access to Codex, I guess. His kit gives him no damage percent, and his supports, like Emily, aren't actually supports. They're just giving damage, but they don't really give stats. But because he has a lot of motion value, and we're getting actual noticeable supportive buffs with Nicole, then going all in on that supportive ability is kind of just your best bet. You can use Eon Sun, you can use Bennett, they're both pretty okay. with Eon-san, you don't have to worry about circle impact stuff, and she's also just kind of better at C6. If you don't have C6, then maybe Bennett might be better, but whatever. The shield actually does matter for Kenichi. It's not like insanely important to have a shield on Kenichi, but if you want to do the 5E Kenichi combos reliably, or if you're really good at the game, the 6E Kenichi combos, you cannot be dashing. You cannot be doing one more pew pew so that you keep moving to dodge an incoming attack. You need to get those kills out ASAP. And having a shield allows you to do that more consistently. And finally, the energy is also very impactful for the Kenichi teams. In Kenichi teams, Bennett never has enough energy. If you've ever played Kenichi with Bennett, you probably have noticed, why is my character that has 250 ER not getting their burst? It's rough because your overall particle generation is really low, and Bennett's 2E particle generation is not helping. With Nicole, she herself doesn't need to use her burst, and she's also alleviating the ER requirements of the rest of your team. But yeah, so Kenichi's best team right now is Nicole, Durin, Eon-san, but you could also use Emily, and it's also pretty solid. The other one I want to talk about very quickly is Lohan, or I guess Dark Durin. Nicole is very good for Dark Durin. It's actually the team where she's the biggest increase on, but Dark Durin right now is kind of not that great because Bennett doesn't buff off-fielders, and because Dark Durin wants to be off-field while allowing your on-field character to be someone else. Then having a character that is Pyro so that they can buff with the gift set without needing to be on field for Durin's damage. Having an attack buffer that affects off field, very impactful. And having a character that has a lot of pyro particles that can be given to Durin is also pretty impactful. But the main thing is that you basically have no competition for off-field buffers in a team like Dark Durin's premium team, which is going to be Lohan, Citlali, Nicole, Durin. Citlali better than the other options here because her resonance is pretty good, and because scroll is pretty good, and Shilonen doesn't get cryo scroll, and the cryo shred that you get is nice, but And you also get extra, you get the TTDS that you can give to Durin. Now, from what I've looked at so far, and this is like massive caveat because since the Meldurin team is so reliant on reactions for its damage, and because the reactions are multiplicative reactions, where missing one of them is a massive deal. Until we get to properly test the teams, I'm like holding off on making a strong statement on Lohan and Meldurin with Lohan in general. But right now, from what I've looked at, it is actually the Nicole team that I've calced the highest above Varka. I do want to warn against thinking that it's going to be a Lohan team, because right now, again, right, by the time this video comes out, we'll probably know that for a fact, but Lohan has been leaked to be a standard character. I wouldn't be surprised if he is, because I think it kind of makes sense based on his balance. But a lot of people will see this and be like, oh my god, Lohan standard character better than Varka limited character? Wow, he's so broken. The Varka sucks. And like, sure, but we need to understand that the Lohan team is only that good when you're using 3 other limited 5-star characters. And all 3 of them are a pretty massive deal, and missing any of the 3 is a pretty major team DPS loss. But all of this to say, very good for Dark Durin. Lee, Arlecchino, Lenny, all those Pyro Overload carries. Nicole is a side grade or a downgrade to Durin. Chavez is kind of just too powerful still to really want to be replaced, and with the release of the new support set, Durin is almost always an upgrade to Bennett now. And compared to Durin, Nicole is kind of just worse, but there are some teams where she's a lot less worse, like the gap can be very close, like in Fleet teams it's very close, and the shield obviously might make a difference. So you can think of Nicole as, if you already have Durin, kind of a side grade, but maybe more comfortable. And if you don't have Durin, then compared to Durin, she's generally slightly worse offensively, but much better defensively. I guess the Electro carries, unfortunately, she's kind of a downgrade for them. If you look at Chloride is kind of too reliant on Fischl's output to want to replace Fischl. If you replace Durin instead, you don't have off-field Pyro, and that's very annoying rotation-wise, and it's not really enough of an upside to make up for it, to the point where the team DPS is just straight up worse from what I've looked at. With Varessa, Nicole does have the upside of like enabling Durin to use the Hexarai set and increasing the shred from Durin, but you cannot be replacing your second Electro in a Varessa team because she needs the energy a bit too much. And even if you could, Eon-san does way too much for you to want to replace her anyways. And then Chevrolet is kind of just a Varessa team because she needs the energy a bit too much. And even if you could, Eon-san does way too much for you to want to replace her anyways. And then Chevrolet kind of just does too much too. If you don't have C6 Chevrolet, then maybe it gives you an alternative to Chevrolet if you don't want to have to pull for cons, but generally, it's kind of just a downgrade. For Mawika, he's also a downgrade. Mawika's teams basically never have the Hexarai resonance. The Melt teams do not want to lose Eon-san or Citlali, and it's not worth changing either of them so that you can get the resonance for a slightly bigger buff on Nicole. And without the resonance, because Mawika's pretty much the only character doing damage in those teams, he's basically just a worse Bennett, and it's not like Mawika needs the resistance to interruption from the shield, so Bennett's healing is already all the defensive utility you need. On top of that, in a lot of Mawika combos, you can't delay your first burst, or your burst initial cast, because you're reliant on the Citlali Quorum application, and if you don't delay it, you don't get the 300 attack on the burst initial hit. For Overload Mawika, you have Shavars, which is kind of doing too much. You have Eon-san, which is basically necessary for the fighting spirit. And then if you bring Nicole as your last slot, you don't have off-field Electro, which is annoying, but technically you can make that work. You can make it work with Bennett by default. But again, right, same problem. Why would you when Bennett is just better since you don't have Hexarai? Because it's not like Mawika needs a resistance to interruption. So for Mawika, pretty much always a downgrade. Yeah, we can talk about some of the other Hexarai characters. She's fine for Razor, but she's not amazing. She's just like, okay. You can do Razor, Bennett, Chavars, Nicole, and it's fine. A bit better than using the other options, but not by that much. You can do Mona. C6 Mona carry is actually pretty good with Nicole, but Mona carry is probably the most unpleasant team to play. Mona makes Molani look like Neville in terms of how easy they are to play. There was a Hera Dire clear with Mona and no additional 5 stars, and it made me want to try doing the same thing, and I regret it very much. I had a very unpleasant time. I never want to do that again, and I don't want to recommend that to anyone either. So I'm not going to write it down, because you shouldn't do this to yourself. Last thing I want to mention for the teams is, let's bring it back to the other set. Superconduct set has a 2-piece that gives attack. And we have had leaks, although still not particularly reliable, that Sandrone is supposed to be an off-field damage dealer. That's like actually the main source of damage of her team, kind of the same way that Melt Durin is an off-field damage dealer. And if that's the case, then it is very possible that Nicole's value will be higher in the same way that she's very good for Dark Durin for Sandrone. Now, one thing about this is we will have concrete Sandrone leaks before Nicole's even out, and we'll be able to see Sandrone's beta cycles before Nicole's banner leaves. So you should not make a decision for Sandrone teams before we have that information. Let's talk about Nicole's constellations. So Constellation 1, when the party's current active character hits an opponent, an additional special arcane projection unity will be summoned to perform a coordinated attack against the opponent, dealing AoE elemental damage of the character's corresponding elemental type at 600% of their attack. So this C1 is basically just the burst, but without having to cast the burst. And it's 600% of their attack instead of 171 or 180 at town level 10. It can trigger once every 6 seconds, so in the classic 18-second rotations, you would get 3 of them. If your rotations are longer than that, generally, you'll get more than 3 on average, but you'll start having some procs triggering on your supports instead of your carries. So, because those characters are going to have a lot less stats, it's still generally basically the equivalent of 2 procs on a carry, 1 proc on a support per rotation on average. And each of them is basically 1 full Nicole for non-Hexarai units. One thing to notice is that this is called Arcane Projection Unity, and Nicole's Hexarai passive says increase the damage dealt by Hexarai characters' arcane projections by 300% of Nicole's attack. It is very possible, I would say likely, although obviously wording consistency in Genshin is not the best, so grain of salt. But it's very possible that this 300% attack also affects the arcane projection from the C1, and if it does, then it makes the C1 even better for Hexarai characters. From what I've looked at, Nicole's C1, I mean, it's basically just a better Durin C1, right? Durin C1 is 60% of like his attack, up to 20 hits, which is 1200 total in quills. This is 600%, but you're basically guaranteed to get 2 on your carries and 1 of your support, so it's more than 1200. On non-hex characters, it looks at your carry stats, which are often going to be higher than Durin stats would be, so it's kind of just better objectively than Durin C1. And on hex characters, it's even better than that because you get this extra upside here. One interesting thing here is that this is damage dealt of the corresponding character's element, which means for a character like Varka, for example, this will deal anemo damage, not pyro damage. From what I've looked at when I was doing calcs for early vertical investment for Varka stuff, Varka's best goblet was anemo damage if you had C1 Nicole as your only source of vertical investment, which is very funny. Anyways, this cannot melt or vape though, so maybe there's still some situations I'm not thinking of where Durin C1 can be better, but basically between the two, this one's basically always better. So because a lot of people are going to be curious about this, when it comes to the Varka vertical investment, Nicole's C1 is a bit worse than Varka's Sig, but it's not significantly worse. So if you end up pulling for Nicole, pulling for Durin, getting Varka's full premium team, and you want to think about going further than that, it might be more efficient for you to go for Nicole Cons if you're not already at Prune C6, because you can get Prune Cons on the way. Nicole C2, plus 300 to the attack buff, and 25% shred. You also get the shield from using burst, but that doesn't matter because you should always use the skill even when you use burst, because it's a lot of particles. You're not using the burst without the skill, let's be honest. I don't know if maybe the shield by default doesn't work